Welcome again to FiveStone Students. I'm Pastor Adam. If you don't know, the reason I'm saying that is because we have a few first-time 6th graders in the house. Let's hear it from them. Yeah. Raise your hand. I think there's at least 4 I count. Raise your hand if you're a new 6th grader. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for being here. We're excited to have you. Because it is your first Wednesday night in FiveStone Students, we're going to go over some of our house rules so you know what to expect. Because FiveStone Students is a big jump from FiveStone Kids, which I'm sure you're already discovering already. Rule number one, house rule number 1 is we go all in during messages. And so Donna's going to start being passing, she already is, passing around notes and pens so you guys can pay attention. Simple rule of thumb, 6th graders, if you see it on the screen, you probably could be writing it down. Okay, it's something important to be jotting it down. Especially bottom lines. Bottom lines are the one takeaway we want you to remember, so that if your parents ask you in the car, what'd you learn at church tonight? You can say, oh, here's our bottom line. Mom, Dad, you want the passage from the Bible too that we talked about? Really impress your parents. Okay, so we go all in during the message. We're not on our phones stay in our pockets. We're paying attention, we're not being a distraction around us, especially this group over here, guys, right? We're not going to distract our neighbors, right? We're going to stay quiet, pay attention. All right, number 2, we stay away from PDA. I'm really worried about this with 6th graders, but still, it's a rule for everybody. PDA is, what is PDA? You guys know what it is? Okay, it's, personal displays of affection. Yeah, okay, so if you're sitting next to your girlfriend, boyfriend, oh, it's sweet, but keep your hands to yourself. Same rule as at school, okay, keep your hands to yourself. Number 3, we don't leave the room during service. 6th graders, this will be something different. You're all big boys and big girls. You can hold the potty till after the service. It's not that long, I don't preach that line, unless it's only going to be about a 30-minute message. You can hold it. You're not preschool anymore. Stay where you are. We're in a very tiny room. When you get up to leave, to go out to the hallway, major distraction in a room this size. So stay where you are till the service ends, please. And number 4, you've already seen this, we have fun in church. So you're going to have fun here at FiveStone Students. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome. All right, so we're kicking off this new series, The Greatest. Who in here has a friend, or maybe not a friend, I don't know, but somebody that you're always with, whenever you're with them, it seems you always get into a debate or an argument. You have somebody like that? Yeah. Now I'm not talking like a knockdown, drag out, like actual fight, and like you're pissed at each other and angry. No, I'm not saying that. But you always are debating this person. It's always something. Maybe you talk about, who's the greatest band of all time, or who's the greatest football team of all time, those kind of things. You're always debating them. Let's call them GOAT debates. And so, do you guys all know what a GOAT is? G-O-A-T? Greatest of all time? Just so you know. Okay, you knew that. That's good, that's good. Now, the topics can be completely random when you're talking about things. You may discuss things like, what's the greatest video game of all time? Now, I'm a video game guy, and I'm old. So I would say the greatest video game of all time is GoldenEye 007 for N64. That's Nintendo 64, if you don't know what that is, which was the game of the year in 1997, my freshman year of high school. Like I said, I'm old. All right, so that's what I would argue if somebody wanted to say what there is. I'd throw my 2 cents in for 007. Or who's the greatest basketball player of all time? High schoolers, if you've seen the shoes I wear, you can probably already guess. It's Michael Jordan. Duh, we don't need to have a debate. LeBron, ooh. No, it's Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time. Duh.
Kobe Bryant.
I was Kobe fancy, but we're going to stick with my MJ. All right. What's the greatest toy of all time? I would say Legos. I think Legos actually officially won the best toy of the 20th century. So I've got some evidence backing my position, but you might have a different argument for your best toy of all time. Definitely my opinion is Legos. Then there's other things that I really don't have an opinion on, like who's the greatest guitar player of all time? Sure. All right, I'm not going to argue with that on that one. At USC now, he's here to you in LA. What's up, man? Or what's the greatest movie of all time? I'm a little bit of a movie buff, but everybody's got their own picks.
Avengers.
Tron. Okay, all right. I'm not going to argue with you on that one. This one I will, though. As a soccer player, I got to say, who's the greatest soccer player of all time? I'm going to have to go with Cristiano Ronaldo on that one. Sorry if you're a Messi fan. Sorry. Now, these conversations usually start out lighthearted like we were starting, but a couple of you gave me some dirty looks when I said my opinions, which is what it always is. Now, usually when you have GOAT debates, they start out just for fun. Maybe you're bored, you're just trying to kill the time, so you get into that. And then you think, well, maybe if we get a little bit more heated, the time will go a little faster. So maybe Maybe sometimes that friend of yours just takes it a little too far though, gets a little too passionate. So why does it happen in those kind of goat debates that we always go from something kind of lighthearted and fun as a joke, and then it gets like really serious and we start getting like upset at each other? I have no idea. Maybe the other person is just somebody that you like arguing with. Do you have people that you like arguing with? Maybe that's that person. You just argue with them for argument's sake. There you go. And you think that if you get more passionate, the time will fly a bit faster. But there's one thing that always seems to be true. Whenever I hear a goat debates, greatest of all time debate, one thing always seems to be true. Both people think they're completely 100% right. You know what I'm saying? Like, you see in their faces like, how can you think that? I don't understand. Obviously it's this person. The other person's like, obviously it's not that person, it's the other person. Maybe you say things like, yeah, he may be the second or third greatest basketball player of all time, but the greatest, number one? No. Or that video game may be in the top 5 of all time, but not the greatest of all time. There's a reason why people don't debate things like, what is the 6th greatest movie of all time? You usually don't hear people about that. That's a really boring topic because no one in America cares about a place other than first. All right? You're the first, and what's second? What's the famous phrase? Second place is what?
Last. You're either first or last.
Right. Well, second place is like just.
Second's the best.
Yeah. That's not the phrase I've heard. Well, just said second's the best. Okay. In America, yeah. It's first to nothing in America. So people want to know what's the greatest. As you can see my shirt's on it. You guys see what kind of state this is representing here. What's the greatest state in the country? Texas, of course. I'm wearing my Texas Pride shirt. State of savages, right here.
Boom. Friendship.
What?
Tejas.
Texas, I said it. Texas. Shoot.
Friendship. Know your history.
It is no longer Tejas.
All right, we're getting into a debate here right now. See what I'm saying? All right, they were laughing first, now they're angry at each other. All right. So why is this? Why is this? Why do people want to know what's the greatest? What is number one? Why? Because isn't it true that the things, check this out on the screen. Here's our first one. Whoop, we're rebooting right here. Yeah, okay. So our first point is, why do we want to focus on the best? Here it is, number one. Because isn't it true that the things we think are the greatest are things we like? You know what I'm saying there? The things we think are the greatest in our mind are things that we like. Things that we're for. You can say it another way. Things that we're for. That's why no one says, I'm for. Oh, there it is. So you can write that down, guys. 6th graders, there you go. The things that we think are the greatest are the things we like. That's why no one says, I'm for dentist appointments, or I'm for household chores, or I'm for research papers. Those are all the greatest ways to spend time. No one says that. By the way, most of you are back at school. Is there anybody not back at school yet? Most of you are back already, though. I do have a question for you. Shh. Who has already been assigned a research paper that's due in a couple? Oh my God. This is a crazy time of the year for youth pastors. So, youth pastors are known for loving the fall because people actually come back to church. Like, there's a lot of new faces here tonight that we haven't seen all summer. This is great. So, as a youth pastor, I love the fall. But I also feel really bad for my students because you guys gotta go back to school. And so I feel sorry for you guys doing homework. Especially with research papers already. Ouch. The first couple weeks of school, you already assigned research papers. Ow. I do not miss school. That's one of the great things of being an adult. You don't have to do any more homework. So, guys, I feel for you. I'm sorry for you that you have those research papers. All right. So again, we don't think of things that aren't exciting, like going to the dentist. We're not like, yeah, we're for going to the dentist. Great way to spend your time. No, we don't say that. Of course not. No, essentially, you and I are for the things that are greatest to us. If video games are the greatest way for you to spend your free time, guess what? You are for video games. Or if you're like me and you're a soccer player, you feel like, hey, there's no better way to spend your free time on a Friday or Saturday than going and playing some pickup soccer. That means you are for soccer. If dating multiple girls at the same time is the greatest way for you to spend your weekends, that means you are for being a player. Oh, yeah, right there. Check out this one. Basically, for and the greatest go hand in hand. You see what we're saying? It's like the same thing. When you're for something and it's the greatest in your mind, so if something you're for, it's probably going to be the greatest in your mind. Those go hand in hand. Okay, so write that down. In the same way, none of us are for things or people that we feel like are against us. When you think about your greatest friend of all time, or your greatest teacher of all time, you probably are not thinking they're against you. No, of course not. The greatest teacher you had, or the best friend you've ever had, those are people that were for you. Those are people that had your back. They were on your team. People, for instance, people don't talk about the greatest teacher they've ever had and say things like this. Well, even though I felt like she hated me, she was incredibly knowledgeable about chemistry. And she thought of the most innovative ways to teach us. And so for that reason, she goes down as the greatest teacher I've ever had. Is anybody going to actually say that? No, of course not. No, if you feel like someone's against you, there's no way they're making one of your greatest lists. It's not going to happen. Now think about this idea when it comes to God. Because I think we've all had those times when we've wondered, is God for or against me? Sure, if we were put on the spot in church, we'd give the church answer and say, oh, of course, God is for me. That's what I've always learned in church. But if we're real and we're honest and don't give the church answer, there's probably a lot of us in here tonight that would probably say, if I'm being real, there are times in my life where I felt like God is against me. Maybe we get the feeling that God is against us from being around other Christians or being in church or seeing Instagram posts or overhearing conversations in the hall at school, reading different blogs or watching things on the news. Sad but true, in 2018, Christians in our culture today, in modern day America, we are known probably more than anything as being against things. As in, okay, this company changed a corporate policy, so that means Christians are going to be angry about it. It means okay, as Christians, which stores are we supposed to boycott? You guys know what I'm talking about? You've heard these things? Yes. Seeing things like that make us wonder if God is more of an against God than he is a for God. Because isn't it true that Christians spend a lot of time talking about what God is supposedly against? You guys have heard that? And don't you sometimes feel like God is against you because you've done something or sinned or struggled with something that you're pretty sure that God is against? Let's bring it all full circle with this question right here on the screen, this next one. Go ahead and pull it up, Josh, the next one. Do you feel like the greatest things to God, is that we don't do the things he's against? And you're like, what? Let me rephrase it. Do you feel that you're most pleasing to God when you are against something that you believe God is against? You know what I'm saying now? Growing up, I sometimes wondered if God was against me when I sinned. Then one day I came across an interaction in Scripture that we're going to look at today. It cleared some things up for me, and I hope it does the same for you tonight. It'll help you decide if God is a for God or if he's an against God. One of the many reasons why God chose to send us Jesus is to give us a picture of what he is like. Because 2,000 years ago when Jesus was walking around earth, he literally was God with skin on. And it gave people a human physical picture of God. Check this out. That means if you want valid answers about what God is like, look at Jesus. Jesus is 100% man and 100% God. Fully man and fully God. Jesus shows us what God is like. But not all people accepted Jesus with open arms. If you've grown up in church, you probably know this. They eventually had him killed. In fact, they actually set an actual murderer free in exchange to have Jesus killed. So although Jesus helped, blessed, healed, noticed, and encouraged thousands of people in his 3.5 years of ministry here on earth, there were still people that didn't like him. Why? Well, for starters, number one, Jesus claimed to be God. That's the main reason the Jewish religious leaders killed him. It wouldn't be easy to accept someone who claimed that today, so let's not be too quick to judge people for having a tough time accepting that 2,000 years ago in that culture. Secondly, Jesus was different. I mean, he was different for obvious reasons. Like we just said, he was God, which means he was perfect. He never sinned. He didn't have a sin nature like the rest of us. So that's tough to handle for a lot of people. But also because he challenged their religious views. Religious people of Jesus' time followed something called the Jewish law. Now, I'm not talking about speed limits and curfews, not those type of laws. No, they followed a religious law. And since they felt confident that this religious law came from God himself, it was highly controversial when anyone challenged it. And because Jesus was so different, so difficult for people to figure out and put into a box, they often struggled to know if Jesus was a great teacher of the law or a guy who was trying to destroy the very law that God spoke into existence. Because of that, religious people were always trying to catch Jesus breaking the religious law or saying something that undermined it. And when they built up the courage, they would even ask him questions in an attempt to trap him. What we're going to look at today from Scripture is no different. So to set up this passage that we're about to read, a very smart representative, kind of like a lawyer of the religious people, asked Jesus a question to test his understanding of and commitment to the Jewish law. Matthew records this in his account of Jesus' life. The scene opens with the religious lawyer trying to trap Jesus in Matthew 22:36. So here it is. You can follow on the screen, write it down. You don't have to write down the whole verse, just write that location at the bottom if you're taking notes. It says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Now there were a bunch of commandments, like 613 commandments in the Jewish Torah. Now some of them were positive, as in do this. Some were negative. Don't do that. Some of them you've probably heard of, like the famous 10 Commandments. Now this guy was basically asking, hey Jesus, out of all the big commandments, which one is the biggest? Now that's a fair question to ask. Similar to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago when we started off the series. He's kind of asking a question like, hey Jesus, it's kind of like, what's the greatest rapper of all time? That's kind of what he was saying. Well, not exactly like that, but you get the idea. In the case of religious obedience, people really wanted to know what Jesus thought was number one, the greatest. Jesus replied, verses 37 to 38, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." Okay, the guy's question wasn't shocking. Neither was Jesus' answer here. There's not anyone who's really going to argue with this back in Jesus' culture about saying, oh, of course you should. The number most important thing is you should love God with everything you got. Yeah, in that culture, the Jewish people actually had to memorize a prayer that was like that, loving God with all your heart. They had to memorize this prayer from the time they were little kids. But here's the thing, Jesus wasn't done. Check it out. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now pause there. And the second is like it. Wait, what? You just said the greatest. Like, singular, one thing. No. Jesus, wait, what are you doing? No, when you're talking about the greatest, we're looking for one thing. Number one. There aren't two winners when you're talking about, let's say, the National College Football Championship. Well, at least there aren't any two national champions anymore. The Voice. Any fans of The Voice? Anybody watch The Voice? Yeah? You don't have two winners, right? That's so un-American. Jesus, what are you doing here? The second, there's always got to be a number one. Remember what we said earlier, Jesus was different. So if he wanted two greatest, there's going to be two. So Jesus continues, love your neighbor as yourself. When Jesus mentioned this second command, it had far-reaching implications, and we'll get into those later. in this series. But for the sake of today, I just want you to draw one simple point from Jesus' answer to the religious lawyer. And it's this. According to Jesus, the most important thing about us is what we're for, not what we're against. You guys get that? As Jesus followers, as 21st century Christians, according to Jesus, the most important thing is what we're for. Unfortunately, today in 2018 America, that's not what Christians are known for. We are known for what we're against. We got it backwards, people. Jesus makes it clear, no. Don't be known for what you're against. No, be known for what you're for. If you ever get a chance to study the bigger picture of Jesus' life on earth, and I hope you do, through studying the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll see tons of interactions that Jesus had with people. And although the subject matter of this interaction is certainly one of the most important, when you study all of Jesus' interactions in response to questions, you'll notice something. Jesus rarely responded to what he was against. People wanted to know what Jesus thought about certain groups of people who were of a different ethnicity or a different gender, or were very old or very young, very powerful or those that had no power, those people that were from different religious backgrounds versus people that were from no religious background, people that made different behavioral choices than the norm, and people that made bad behavioral choices or had nothing good to offer anyone. People always were asking Jesus about what he thought about those types of people. And if you study those interactions alongside Jesus' actions, you'll notice something else. Most of Jesus' controversy revolved around people that he loved and was for. Because when you love someone, you are for them. It doesn't mean that you are for all of their choices or their behavior. You can probably think of friends of yours that are making bad decisions at school. They're stuck in sin. That does not mean, being for them does not mean you have to accept all of their choices or all of their sinful actions. That's not what it means. Being for someone means that you want what is best for them. You see the difference? Still, people lost their minds when Jesus ate with sinners, embraced outcasts, and loved people who were rejected by every religious person they had ever met. But Jesus' message for people changed the world. And when you see what Jesus was for, and you hear what Jesus said is the greatest command you could follow, you're clearly pointed toward a big truth, and it's our bottom line tonight. Check it out. God is for you. Say it to your neighbor, and then write it down. God is for you.
God is for you.
And underline it. That's the bottom line. So when parents ask, what'd you learn? That's number one. That's the bottom line. God is for you. God is not an against God. And to him, the greatest thing about us is what we're for, not what we're against. As we wrap up this first week of this series, give you guys some practical steps, 2 practical steps. Whether you've been convinced for a long time that God is against you, or you've been convinced that God is more for you than he is anyone else, that's not good either. I want you to simply respond to Jesus' greatest message by doing 2 small things, right? Number 1, memorize these verses, the ones we talked about earlier. Now, if this verse is the greatest thing to Jesus, then I believe that you and I can figure out a way to memorize this. Now be creative. If you can memorize Drake and Taylor Swift lyrics, pretty sure you guys can handle a couple verses, all right? And just to be a good example to you guys as your pastor, I actually memorized this too, so I'm right there along with you. Ready? I'm going to prove it for you, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You got the next part, Josh? And the second is like it. Got it up? All right. Love your neighbor as yourself. Let's try it all together. Okay? Go back to the first screen. Okay, read along with me. We'll go nice and slow. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Come on, everybody. Next screen. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? You guys can do it. I believe in you. I'm not asking you to believe what that says. No one's forcing you to agree with it. I'm simply asking you to memorize these 3 short verses this week. So write that down, memorize. It's actually not 36, that was the previous verse. It's Matthew 22, 37 through 39. Matthew 22, 37 through 39. And this is the NIV version. So that's your assignment this week. This week, memorize this verse. That's what I'm asking you as your pastor. That's your next step, number 1. Next step, number 2, pay attention to who you're for and against. So this week, okay, you're at school, you guys are right back into the old drama again, okay, hallway drama, you don't have to call into that. You don't have to write it down or say it out loud, but when you hear about, number 1, a person in your school and something bad they've done. That's example 1. Or a group of people and what they represent. Maybe you see it on the news. Or 3, someone who thinks or believes differently than you, and you start to make a judgment about them in your mind. Pause. Stop right there. Stop yourself. Okay? This is your next step. Practical steps. When that happens, it might happen tonight, it might happen tomorrow at school. When you start judging someone, stop. Hit the brakes. Say to yourself, wow, I just took a stand or made a case against that person in my mind. Nice. Like automatically, I heard what it said and boom, sin nature popped that right up. I was already building a case against them. Pause yourself. Become aware of it. That's all. Just pay attention. Okay, that's the second step. Okay? Memorize those couple verses. Catch yourself when you start judging someone tomorrow at school. You guys can handle that, right? 3 easy 2 steps right there. Right? Don't add to you guys' homework load. All right. In response, when Jesus spoke of the greatest commandment, he talked about what he is for. And what we learned here is simple. God is for us. God is for you. After all, he loves us and created us. He sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for us. We have a lot of worth to him. And while he could have focused this moment, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? Jesus could have focused on all the things we should or shouldn't be doing. He didn't do that though. He brought a message of for to a group of people who were so focused on what and who God was against, just like in our culture today. So as you head out tonight in a few minutes, if you've been convinced that God is against you, I want you to ask yourself this question. How would it change my approach to God if I truly believed that he is first and foremost for me? If you found yourself as a Christian wondering who you should be against, I want you to imagine even for a second what it would be like to be for that person that you think you should be against, even if you disagree with them. What would that look like? Have our leaders come to the front as we wrap up. You guys can bow your heads, close your eyes. You can place your hands in your lap in an act of surrender to God in response, and just silently pray to Jesus and ask him, Lord, what are you saying to me? What are you saying to me? I encourage you to talk to a leader tonight if you need prayer or want to accept Jesus as your Savior. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this night. Thank you for these new students that are brand new to FiveStone Students. We pray that this wouldn't be the only time we see them, but instead they would be returning back week after week and growing closer to you, Lord, and taking their next step, whatever that is, Lord. Lord, we pray that this message wouldn't just go in the ear and out the other ear with these students, but that they would hear this message from you and apply it to their lives this week. I pray, Lord, that you show them the practice steps they need to take. I pray that you help these students to memorize that passage that we talked about, to help remember what's most important to you, that it's not about what we're against, but we should be known as Christians for what we're for, because that's what you are known for. And Lord, I pray that when these students are tempted to judge others or to think negative things or build up cases against that person, but they would instead, that you would convict them of that, stop them in that, and help lead them to a way to remind them of what it would look like instead of being against this person if I was actually for them, like Jesus would be. Lord, we pray your blessing and protection over each of the students and their families. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so new 6th graders, if this is your first time here, what we do now is we transition to what's known as D groups, discussion groups, where we break into groups. And so we don't have a ton of leaders here tonight, so the groups are going to be larger. And so guys and girls can be mixed. It doesn't have to just be guys, but guys and girls and girls. Just pick a leader. Don is here too, so if you want to be with Don, you can. Ben, you want to go ahead and grab the sheets in the back there, discussion groups questions. And we're going to actually discuss this message, break it down in a small group format. You guys have done a really good job listening today, and so I've done enough talking. We want to hear what you guys have to say, so that's what D groups is all about. So make sure you're with the leader during this time, and we'll give you guys about 15 minutes, then you guys can close in prayer by praying for each other, and we'll close with one last song and announcements.